So my clock shows that it's 6:05. Jana, should we start? Would you like to do some introduction?
Well, yeah, we can start. Thank you, Adam. Thank you that you are here. We have organized this webinar with Adam Matlacz, who is our friend of Tesena, and friend of our CEO, Phil, because they met at Eurostar conference, and both of them had very successful presentation there. Adam will talk about exploratory testing. It will take about an hour, I guess. And after that, you are welcome to raise any questions you have. And as we mentioned, the meeting will be recorded, so you can also watch it again if you want to. And I think that is all from my side, from the side of Tesena. And Adam, it is yours.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Jana, and thank you, Tesena, for hosting me here. I'm very excited to be here, even though I'm right now on vacation. That's why this is a little bit unusual setting which you are seeing right now, and that's also why I'm having some refreshments with me. Feel free to have yours if you are prepared for webinars. I love giving webinars right now online because I can have what I want during the meeting, and at the same time I can gather the valuable knowledge from the other people. So feel free to grab something to drink, and as you heard, the meeting will be recorded, so you can listen to it later on. A few disclaimers and maybe one correction at the beginning. The meeting will take about 1 hour with the questions, right? So I will not talk, it will not be a talking head for 1 hour. I will talk for like 45 minutes, and then there will be a time for Q&A session with you guys, right? So somewhere around 7 o'clock, you will be free to go to continue your vacation if you're on holiday right now. Additional disclaimer, sorry for talking very fast, that's just the way I am, and I will do my best to slow down and explain everything as visually and deeply as possible. But if I'm speaking too fast or something, you didn't understand something, don't worry, raise your hand or even unmute yourself and ask me to repeat. I'm not afraid of doing that because I understand that if I'm speaking too fast, that might be not very good for others. And last but not least, please take notes, because as you will see in a moment, my slides are not very wordy. All right, so there won't be many information on the slides, but there will be much information coming out from my mouth and information I want to pass to you guys. And what I think will be beneficial for you, because the things that you will see today and hear today is like a summary of 1 year, almost 1 year experiment, which I'm conducting in my organization, which actually right now it's not even an experiment, because right now it's a part of our daily work. And you will hear about it a little bit more in a moment. And this experiment showed me that the real power of exploratory testing lies in the creativity and testers' freedom. And that's the main point of today's presentation, right? So it will be about exploratory tests, but mainly about the creativity and testers' freedom to perform tests that comes, and from that comes the greatest power of exploratory tests and the tests in themselves, right? So that's why I believe that you should explore the ways to embrace exploratory tests and freedom and creativity in your projects. But before I start, I will have like a riddle, maybe. A question to you guys. What do you see on the screen? And I'm not asking about what's on the picture, because that's probably you would have to spend some time to connect the dots and see what's underneath, right? But what is it, right? What do you see on the screen right now? You can unmute yourself and just speak. Anybody?
Yeah, it's a plan.
It's a plan?
Yeah.
Might be, but that's so. Let me maybe give you some hints. That's something that you give to your children, right? Child to play with it, right? And it's not a plan exactly, right? It might be, but it's not.
Then it must be typical software specification.
Typical software specification. I really like that answer. So yeah, I agree. You could look at it and you cannot figure it out. What is it until you connect the dots? So I really like that answer, but it's not. So okay, it's a riddle, right? What you see on the screen right now, it's a riddle which you give to your children to play with, and they have to connect the dots. So they actually need two things to solve that riddle. One is a pen or pencil or whatever to connect the dots, and second is the dots, right? So a lot of different dots with correct numbers, with incorrect orders, which you need to connect to see a bigger picture, right? To see the solution to that problem. And why I'm showing you child's riddles, right? Why I'm showing you games, you will understand during my presentation, during my my webinar, and what is on the picture you will see at the very end, because I don't want to hold you back thinking, okay, what's on that riddle, because that's what I would normally do when I see something like that, what's on the picture. So I will show you also that, but bear with me and you will have answer to both questions. Firstly, what's on the picture? Secondly, why I'm showing you that picture. So let's jump to the webinar. Who I am? As Jana described, I'm Adam Matlacz. I'm a tester with more than 10 years of experience in IT. Not all of that experience comes from testing, because I was also Agile coach, Scrum Master, business analyst, pre-sales engineer. So actually, I have done almost everything in IT except developing. So I was never a developer. But besides development, I have done almost everything, right? Most of that time I have spent in testing, and right now I'm a test manager and test architect at Demand. But besides my 8 to 5 no, 8 to 4 work, right? I also do some trainings, webinars. I go to different conferences, and right now I'm starting my cooperation with Tesena. So today actually is my the first day when I cooperate with Tesena on giving webinars, but also trainings about which you will learn later on. And let's get straight to the story behind the exploratory test in Demand, which we introduced some time ago. Firstly, it was like a typical team built from 10 testers. We had sprints, we worked in sprints, we had some stories which we tested, and so we did some exploratory tests in our organization, right? Exploratory tests around features, mostly around some IP points where we put some pieces of software together. Then we had some exploratory tests around that one, right? It was a business as usual, typical company, as every company in which probably you guys work, right? But we thought that this is not enough, that there is a plenty of space which we can plenty of things that we can do to improve our testing, to improve our ways of tests, and also to improve the way our team is working, because our team was consisting like half of the people had already had some experience, but other half of the team was unexperienced. So it were interns or people that just started testing, like junior testers, which didn't have too much experience in different techniques for exploratory tests and tests themselves, right? So we were thinking what we could do, what we could improve, and what would be the first place where we should put some improvements to the way we work. And we decided that we should start with more broader exploratory tests, right? Not only test in sprints the stories that we are testing, not only do the system verification at the very end, which system verification is like user acceptance testing, right? And user acceptance testing is not done for verifying and looking for defects. It's more for accepting the stuff that we are we have developed, right? So we needed something in between, right? Because at one part we had the features tested in Sprint, and on the second part we had this system verification, and there was nothing between. So we decided, let's do some exploratory tests focused on different features and different parts of our application. And the first thing that came to our mind was maybe let's systemize it using Excel, right? And that's how something like that emerged, right? We decided that we will create Excel in which we will put different features of our application in different columns of the Excel. And then with each iteration, different testers can put information, what they have tested and what they haven't tested, right? And there were like 3 states for every column, or 4 states for every column. State number 1, that the feature passed. State number 2, the feature is not developed yet, right? So we didn't explore that feature yet. Number 3 would be that we skipped that feature, because not in every iteration we had to test everything. It was more like a time box, right? So we said, okay, so we spent 1 day for exploration, and during that day, whatever we can test. So some features were skipped. And of course, the 4th state would be that something didn't pass, right? So there are some defects in that feature. And moving on, the Excel filled out with the data with different iteration. But this was more like ad hoc work, right? So we didn't plan upfront, so we will have these iterations. We said, okay, we have time right now, so let's do the exploratory tests using the Excel. So we released new IP points, so new place where we integrated different things from the application. Let's do exploratory tests right now. So it was more ad hoc, when we had time or when there was a need. It was not well prepared, and also we didn't use any techniques. We didn't experiment with any new techniques that we could use for exploration. It was more like, here is the app, just click around, and in this Excel you see a list of features. So your task is to do as many features from the Excel as you are able, in whatever way you want, right? So from one side, it's a very good approach, because you're not putting any boundaries on tester. He can freely test any feature which he sees. But at the same time, you're not giving them a guidance. So they don't, if tester is experienced, he will pretty well perform this exploration using Excel only with different features named in the Excel, right? But if the tester is not well experienced, if he doesn't know any techniques, then he's alone in the dark. He's doing exploration in the forest, but he will be lost. He doesn't have any map, he doesn't have any compass. He knows that there are these different features in the application, but he's not like he's not experienced explorer, right? He will go through the forest, he will pass through it, but he will do it having like dark glasses, right? Because he doesn't have experience in looking around and looking for some specific things. So what could we do? Then we decided that we need to add something to our exploration, especially that this was more regression than exploration. It had a part of exploration because you were exploring freely, but it was more regression because we are focused not on different techniques, but focused on different features in our app. So that's how we came up with the experiment. And the experiment started very simply. So we decided that we will book in our calendar every 2 weeks, 2-hour session, 2.5-hour session actually at the beginning. So 2.5 exploratory session where we will all gather in one room. We will learn new technique for exploratory tests. And then we will perform that technique on our application, right? So we'll take our app, and using that technique, we will test the app. The beauty of that is that if we do this consistently every 2 weeks, then after 2 weeks, we know 2 techniques. After 4 weeks, we know 3 techniques, and so on and so on. So after every new week, we will learn new technique for exploratory tests, and we even during these exploratory sessions we will not find many bugs, we will have these techniques, and we will have prepared our workshop with different tools that we can use later on. We can use that tools during filling that Excel. We can use that tools during sprint work. We can use that tools whenever we want, right? Because we will have prepared our workshop filled out with different tools which we can use for exploration. Another thing that was a part of that experiment was that each session doesn't have to be handled by one person, right? So this session was prepared by Adam Matlacz, but the next session can be prepared by somebody else from the team. We had 10 people in our team. We read different blogs, we read different books, we go to different conferences. So all of us have different knowledge about techniques that we could use during the verification, during the test, during the exploration. And this was beautiful platform for sharing knowledge between testers. Every 2 weeks, 2.5 hour session where we learn new technique, take our app to our workshop, and explore it and test it and dissect it to small pieces, right? Looking for defects, looking for new things that might be interesting for us. But before we started that, we had prepared a small workshop with the team where we looked on how actually what's the true power of exploratory tests and how to perform exploratory test session. So firstly, we had a whole day workshop to prepare our team, and this workshop consisted of 2 modules. That was the initial workshop we had with our team, where first module was based on creativity, what creativity is, what creativity can bring to your work, how to be creative, how to be more creative, right, and so on. And second part of the workshop was about exploring. What exploratory tests are, how to perform them better, what are the different techniques that we could use, and so on and so on. So firstly, we prepared our initial workshop to set the stage for the whole team. And after that workshop, after setting the stage, every 2 weeks, we prepared new different technique by different team members, right? So let's briefly go through the steps of our initial workshop, because that's the meat which I want to share with you, right? These 2 things, the creativity and what are exploratory tests. And the exploratory test, the creativity, the first part of our workshop, is something that is the most valuable thing that you can bring to your work and your firm with you, right? When you exchange the jobs, even if you learn different tools like, I don't know, Excel, Word, or programming languages, Java, Python, whatever, right? These are things which you can quite easily learn. But something that is the most valuable and something that you cannot learn so easily is your creativity. The pieces of knowledge and the way how you put stuff together, right, comes with you from company to company, from team to team. That's the most valuable resource which you can bring with you to your work, right? And that's why I put so much emphasis on different creative techniques and on the way how people can be more creative in their daily work. But before we dive into that, what is creativity? What do you think, guys? How would you define creativity? Yeah, and now you can unmute yourself and give me some propositions. Of course, if you can still hear me. So what is creativity? Okay, I will try to ease it up for you. What you can see on the screen, do you recognize that plant? Who recognizes that plant?
That was me.
Sorry?
That was me who recognized that plant.
Okay, you recognize that plant. Great. Do you know what great invention was found out thanks to that plant?
Oh, the plant. Sorry, I thought you were speaking about the plant. I have no idea.
Okay. But by any chance recognize this, what you can see on that picture?
And it's like this thing.
Yeah. Who said yes? What is it? What do you use it for?
We use it for clothes, and when we need to stick something to something, I have it on my cable on the laptop.
Great, that's Velcro, right? One of the greatest inventions of 20th century. Actually, it's much older, but still, it's a great invention where you can put stuff together. Your children no longer have to tie their shoes. They can just use Velcro to fasten their shoes or fasten some seat belts and so on, right? That's a great invention. And the idea for Velcro comes from nature, right? It comes from this plant, actually, right? The guy was walking through the forest, and this stick to his clothing, and then he decided, why it sticks to my clothes? He looked under the microscope, he analyzed that plant, and he had seen these small hooks in that plant, and then he figured it out. If I can create a material which will have these small hooks, I can then put it together with different material, right, and use it for fast closing stuff, right, or fastening my clothes or whatever, right? It had like million of different ways you can use Velcro in different setups. So the idea for Velcro came from nature, right? It was not something that was invented from nothing. It didn't came from the void. It came from something. So that's one of the main pieces of what creativity is. It's something completely new, but that's something that is put from the stuff that is already there. It already exists. And Velcro is only one example, because you can see different pieces of art. You could say, is art creative? Of course it is. Have you seen Sagrada Familia? It's a great church in Barcelona, right? And almost whole cathedral is made from different parts of nature. Gaudi was inspired by nature, and he invented stuff not from the thin air, but from the things that he observed in the nature. And the second part of the definition, so firstly, something new, but actually built from different stuff, put it together. The second part of the definition is something valuable, right? So you can, I don't know, put some gem on your wall and say, oh, that's creative, that's something new. Nobody have put some gem on my wall. That's great, but it's not a value to me, at least, right? But it must be valuable to somebody. So if somebody would decide that this gem smashed over my wall is valuable to him because it brings some memories to him or something like that, then it would be creativity. But if it doesn't bring value, then it's not creative, actually, right? So creativity in your work, in your daily work, is taking different pieces of information and putting them together in a way that it's valuable to somebody else. It's like the dots, which you have seen at the beginning of my presentation, right? There is a bigger picture there. There is a picture there. And when you connect the dots in a particular way, in particular order, using some tools like pen or on pencil or whatever, then you will see a bigger picture that might be valuable to you, might be even considered a piece of art, maybe. Not really, but maybe to somebody, right? So that's where creativity comes from. You have to have a lot of different dots in front of you. You have to know techniques how to connect the dots, and you have to have the tools to connect the dots. And that's exactly what we were doing on our exploratory tests testing session. Every 2 weeks, we were learning new dots. We were learning new tools to connect the dots. We were learning different parts of our application, which we didn't see for a very long time, right? Because on a daily basis, we were testing features in a sprint. During the exploratory session, we took application and said, okay, so now we're testing this and that, something which was not tested for the last 3 months, for example, right? So some feature that was not touched. for 3 months, and we were looking at it again, right? So we were refreshing ourselves with the dots we already have seen in the past, right? To be up to date with the whole application, right? So that's how these exploratory testing sessions have bring us firstly the dots, secondly the tools to connect the dots, and thirdly different ways of connecting the dots, because the dots can be connected in a straight line, the dots can be connected in a round line, or different kind of way, right? And different techniques were exactly that. We were delivering us different ways to connect the dots. And then in our workshop, we had a second part. The first part was different kind of exercises where we were learning different creative techniques, where we were learning what creativity is, which I've right now gave you briefly, just a small part of what we were learning on our workshop, right? And then was the second part about exploratory tests, about thinking, the way testers are thinking. And the second part, we're giving you exactly the initial set of dots, right? Like the initial tools which you need at the beginning to start the exploratory sessions. So let's jump into that part and let's have an exercise with you guys. So what are exploratory tests? Based on your experience, based on your knowledge, based on your projects, what do you know about exploratory tests? What are there? Anybody? Do you have somebody brave here? Come on, guys. What are exploratory tests?
Usually some free form that has no given structure. Basically, you are playing with the tool or software, you are exploring your options and possibilities.
I completely agree with half of the stuff that you said, right? So of course it's a way where you're playing with different parts of your application in different ways, but I wouldn't agree that it doesn't have structure. Exploratory tests might have structure, don't have to have a structure, but might have structure, right? Because you're right, you can just take the application and click around in a way which just emerges in my mind, but in a way it has a structure that is just emerging, right? It's like, would you say that Agile, the Scrum doesn't have structure? It's a very structured framework, right? It has sprints, but actually Scrum emphasizes that you don't know what you will do in the next 2 weeks, right? You don't know what you will do in the next sprint. You can plan it, but during the first sprint, you gather new knowledge and you learn that, okay, maybe that's not the best feature to develop. Maybe we should develop different feature. And in the next sprint, you're developing feature which you didn't even know that will exist 2 weeks ago, right? So Scrum has a very particular structure which you use in your development, but at the same time, it doesn't, because you don't know what you will do in the next 2 weeks. You don't know what you will do in the next 3 months, and it's similar with the exploratory tests. You don't know what you will explore. You don't know what you will see there, right? You can expect something, you can plan for it, but you are using some structure. It's either structure called some kind of technique which you can use. That's even better because it shows you a little bit that direction. It can be like a compass or a map for you. Or it can be your mind putting a structure, because we as people have structures in our heads, we just don't know about it, right? So we have some schemas in our heads. So exploratory tests always have some kind of structure, right? Would you agree with that?
I would partially.
Okay, let's discuss it. I'm open to discuss.
Yeah, okay. I maybe mentioned the original idea, not structure, but you don't use any way of test plan for doing exploratory testing, because usually, from my experience, when you do exploratory testing, you don't have that much time, so you can waste it for preparing some form of the tests. You have basically a few hours to 1-2 days to try to find out if everything is behaving as it should be, as the last step of like the official steps like regression or other ways. That was my idea at the beginning.
Okay. So
you explained that very well.
Okay, thank you. So here I agree even more, but still you might have a plan. It will be just shorter plan because it will be a plan for the next 2 hours, for example, right? You don't have to have a plan. That I fully agree. You don't have to have that, right? But from experience, which I have for the last half year or for almost 1 year of this experience in my organization, the more you plan upfront your exploratory session, which might be 2 hours, as you mentioned, that's true, it might be only 2 hours, but the more time you spend on planning, the more things you can find during that session, right? Of course, not to be ridiculed, don't spend like 1 hour and 45 minutes on planning and then 15 minutes on testing, because then it doesn't make sense. But if you spend the first few minutes or 30 minutes even on planning the whole session, it will go smoother and you will go further into the forest or the jungle you are entering, right? And it's similar as you go exploring the city, for example, right? If you go to a tour to see different places, you can say, I don't have any plan. I will just wander around. And of course, if you wander around a city, you might find a pearls, right? Like the best restaurant in the city, which you wouldn't find on Google, because this restaurant is only for locals, right? You can find places like that, I agree, if you wander around. But if you have a good plan or visiting like good landmarks in your city, then you will see more than without a plan. You will see more of the things that you need to see, right? Because in the testing, you have to prioritize. Do remember the creativity definition? It must bring value. It doesn't mean when you want to see the city, you just don't want to see whatever in the city, right? There are some places which are really pearls. Being in Paris and not seeing Eiffel Tower would be a loss, right? You might find a best baguette shop in the city, but if you wouldn't see an Eiffel Tower in Paris, that would be a loss for that tour, right? So good planning beforehand, even if it's very brief, is better than no planning. And that's actually the definition which I really like from Bach and Kerner, that exploratory tests are actually simultaneously learning, test design, and test execution. So actually, when you will dissect the exploratory session to small pieces, you will find there almost everything from ESTQB, right? I hate ESTQB, even though for some time I was accredited trainer. I didn't extend my certificate, so right now I'm just trainer, not accredited by ESTQB. But they were right about a part of it, right? They were right about that these different phases of testing, which you have described in ESTQB, are very important. They just don't have to be so much documented as ESTQB describes it, right? These parts of testing, like planning, test execution, test design, and so on, can take place in your head, and that's enough. That might be enough, right, for execution of testing. So actually, almost all, or actually all kinds of testing are exploratory testing. Even if you do scripted testing, then you're actually doing exploratory testing. Why? Because before writing the script, you have to explore. You have to explore the documentation. You have to explore the app itself, right? So click around the interface and then write test case. People write test cases like that. So first explore the application and then write the test case. So even when executing test cases, it's a kind of exploratory test, just extended in time, right? So that's what exploratory tests are. And a really important part of that is something that you mentioned, is the freedom of the tester to perform the test. Because in normal tests, let's say normal tests, right? The tests are pretty well planned. They are set in some test setups, test sets, right? So test cases are ordered, right? And there are planned upfront. But in exploratory tests, you usually don't have test cases. The test cases are in your head, right? You create test cases as you go. So you have much more freedom. But with greater freedom comes great responsibility, as one philosopher said. in Spider-Man, right? Because when you give testers a freedom to explore whatever they want, they sometimes will firstly miss the things that they should see, like the Eiffel Tower in Paris. You have to see it, right? Come on, being in Paris and not seeing like Eiffel Tower would be a huge loss, right? So they might miss these parts. They might miss parts which are risky, for example, right? So when you are setting up the exploratory session, it's good to put some boundaries on testers, which will help them and direct them in the exploratory session, right? The boundaries might be like the time box, and the idea of putting the session in a time, in a specific time, from this hour to this hour, we meet in this room and we'll do exploratory tests and we'll explore feature 1, 2, and 3, right? This is putting some boundaries on the exploratory test and giving some direction to the tester. They still can explore using their own knowledge and their own brains. So the greatest tool that tester ever possess, their brains. But setting the direction, setting the boundaries helps them do their job well. Giving them some particular tools, like the tools I mentioned previously on previous slides, right? Different testing techniques also helps them. They will use these tools in different way. So two testers using the same technique will actually test differently. I think we can all agree on that, right? Having the hammer doesn't mean that everybody will use the hammer in the same way, right? People will use it in a different ways. And that's like the second part, which I emphasized on our workshop, right? On the for my team, giving people some framework like Scrum, right? Every team, there are many teams that work on Scrum, but every team works differently, right? So it's good to give to your team some kind of framework for performing this exploratory testing session, to give them guidance, show them direction, and give them compass to show them the right direction. And then there was after this initial workshop with my team, after talking about creativity, about the way testers think, the way testers do the exploratory testing, giving them different tools, we had the first exploratory test session, right? That was like initial session guided by me, where we took the first technique and we tested for about hour and a half. And at the end of the session, there was like last part, which was, I think, the most important one, was the briefing, right? So each exploratory session had 3 parts. Part number 1, introduction into new technique. Part number 2, the test itself using that technique. And part number 3, the briefing. The briefing was a part where we were going through our our heads and the comments we could have to that technique, speaking what we liked in that technique, what we didn't like in that technique, what we could change for the next time, and so on and so on. And the third part to me was the most important one, because even if during the tests we didn't find too many defects, that's fine. The most important part for me was passing the knowledge from tester to tester, from session to session, sharing the knowledge between testers and giving them set of the dots, right? Giving them set of the dots which they can use later on. Because I knew that after they get out from the session, when they get back to their desks and start testing, they will use these dots, right? They will use these tools which they learned during the exploratory sessions. And after some time, it turned out that we not only use that time for learning, but we also use that time for finding defects, because the ratio of defects that we started finding from these exploratory tests rised up, right? In the first session, we didn't find any defects. In the next session, we found some defects, and right now each session ends up with list of defects that we pass to developers, right? So on that slide, I just wanted to emphasize that after the first session, just repeat. Every 2 weeks, 2.5 hours, we learn new technique, we execute that technique, and so on and so on, right? And yeah, somebody wanted to say something? Or just somebody didn't mute himself? Okay. So repeat it, and that's something that what you can do, what I believe you can do in every team, in every organization, because most of them. Sorry? Somebody wanted to say something?
No, tak nakonec ne, protože
okay,
já
please.
si nakonec ty dny, který jsem chtěl.
Okay. Thank you. I think somebody forgot to mute himself, and that was pretty funny. Okay. Just give me a second. Somebody wrote something on the chat. Yeah, the presentation should be displayed, and I think you can see the presentation right now, right? Great. You can see my slides, right?
Yes, we can see them.
Great. Somebody wrote on the chat something about the presentation. That's great. So repeat it, and you can do it in every organization. What I believe, because it's like 2.5 hours only for testers. If you work in Scrum, then you spend much more time on different other meetings, and this can be treated as a really benefit to your team, to finding defects and not testing only stories and features, but also exploring your application using different techniques. Right, so something which I believe you can do in every organization. And the organization in which I work, it's a organization that works on medical software and medical devices. So you can imagine that we are very strict, and we still can do this. And just only to sum up, after the yes, it should be white slide, don't worry. After this almost 1 year of working on different techniques, we learn techniques like breaking news technique, tour-based testing, which is based on exploratory software testing by James Whittaker, right? I highly recommend reading this book, or at least reading the blog post, which is a great summary of that book. We also learn CSI testing, and this is a great idea, which I think the great thing about this idea is that it actually is something that you will not find on the internet, because this technique was developed by one of the testers from my team, Ella, which you can right now see on the picture. This is the girl with the glasses, obviously not me. She invented this technique, right? After a few sessions, she invented her own testing technique, which she then learned teach the whole team, and which we used on one of the sessions, right? So that's the power of creativity, which you can see. If you have many dots in your head, you can connect them in completely new ways. Except CSI testing, we also use testing personas, and not the testing personas which you can find on the internet, but we one of the testers from my team developed his own testing personas for the session. And testing variables, also technique that you will not find on the internet. That's something which we invented based on one of the books about exploratory tests. So again, additional technique that we invented by ourselves, using the different resources and different dots that we could find on the internet. So that's basically it about what we have done in our organization. I already see that I spend more time talking than I planned, but I think it's good. We'll jump to a Q&A in a moment, because firstly, of course, I promised you at the beginning that you will see what you can see on the picture with the dots. These were just part of the penguins. So as I said, somebody can say that this is a piece of art to him, right? It might be valuable, but it might not. It might be just pretty penguins on the screen. And to sum it up, I gave you right now a compass. So I showed you a direction in which you should go. And if you have made a good notes during the presentation, or if there will be a recording available to you, you can just rewind it. You can find your way by your own, right? You just need to Google a little bit, look through the different books and so on. But if you don't want to do it alone, if you would like to use my help and my experience, the stuff that I already learned, and don't make the mistakes, because we have made some mistakes on our way, don't make the mistakes that we have done and save some time, you can take a map. And a map would be a workshop which I'm giving with Tesena, which you can find on that link or in that QR code. So you can print screen, make a photo with your phone, or just enter the link, right? So you can either go through this way by your own, and I believe you are able to do it based on the stuff that I have said here. But if you want some guidance, you can just join Tesena or write to me, and we can organize a training. There will be one training in August, which is already planned with Tesena. You can book your tickets using this link. Thank you, guys. So now is the time for the Q&A. We have 11 minutes for that. So whoever wants to ask a question, just start. I can see that somebody write some on the chat. Do you have any tips on how testers can develop their creativity? Yes, I have many. First tip would be learn as many different techniques as possible, right? So reading different blog posts, reading different books will help you with your creativity, because you will find these different dots, which then you can connect by yourself, right? And the important part, there are two important parts of that in creativity. Firstly, knowing all the dots, and secondly, having balls. Having balls meaning that you have to be brave to connect these dots in a new way, right? So that's the way how you can develop your creativity in your testers. And the thing that we have done in our organization is in my opinion a really good way to develop creativity, not only for yourself but the whole team. So if you want to organize this in your organization. The second question from Violetta, can you please share any resources to learn more about exploratory testing? Yes, give me a second. I have a book with me on my holiday. Give me a second. I need to grab it from the bookshelf. So actually, that's the book which I share on almost every presentation. And to me, this is like the best book which I know about exploratory tests. It's called Explore It by Elizabeth Hendrickson. And the two techniques which I shared here, so the breaking news techniques and the variables testing technique, the inspiration for them comes from this book, right? So, well, I dare to call this technique ours because we made some modification, but the initial idea for these two techniques comes from this book, right? So I think this is a really great resource. Another book is the one that you have seen on one of the previous slides, is from the James Whittaker about exploratory testing, but this book mainly focuses on tool-based testing. So you will learn different exploratory tools, how to use them, and it's a really great book. But in my opinion, if you will read a blog post about tool-based testing, you will know like 90% of what is in the book, right? So I still encourage you to buy and read the book, of course, but if you want to save some time, just read some blog posts, read on the internet what tool-based testing is, and you will also learn. And like the third place would be just Google for different heuristics, testing heuristics. If you haven't heard these words, then just put in Google testing heuristics, and you will find many of them, which will help you learn, again, different techniques which you can use on your exploratory tests and your daily basis. Yeah, there are many sources on the internet which you can also find. Yeah, should the presentation be displayed? This is one of the questions that was previously and which puzzled me. A question from Emilia. Could you share some details about the CI testing? No. So the CSI testing is invention made by Ella from my team, and I promised her that it will be hers, right? So I don't dare to share how the CSI testing works without her. I will ask her, maybe she will give some webinar or meetup or presentation about the CSI testing. I hope for that, and I will support her if she will decide to do that. But right now it's her technique. I can only tell you that the inspiration comes from, of course, the show CSI Miami. That's why she had these glasses with her, and it was more like a framework for testers to show them that they can be like detectives, like looking for clues and so on, right? So the details are, of course, the devil is in the details, so you'd have to see her presentation about the CSI testing, and it's a really great tool, but the inspiration comes from her, and I don't dare to share more about the CSI testing without her consent. Okay, what important steps should be done before exploratory session in order to have valuable outcome? Okay, that's a really good question, and that's something which I cannot share with you in 6 minutes in a whole scope. So my first answer would be Google session-based testing and read about the testing charter, right? These are two tips which you can just Google and read more about it. And now briefly, I will go through the points of that, but of course it will not be the whole picture. To see the whole picture, Google session-based testing and testing charter. These are two essential things to have a valuable outcome from the exploratory session, to have it more efficient. So firstly, session-based testing means that you have to have firstly a goal, a direction in which you want to go. So don't say test the app. No, test this feature using this tool, using these resources to find this outcome. So for example, if I want to know if my app has some security vulnerability, then I would say that test the login screen using SQL injection techniques to find security vulnerability. So this is like a simplified testing charter, which have 3 sentences. And when I put these 3 sentences, I'm setting the stage. I'm setting the stage for the exploratory session, so the testers will not wander around the city looking through the different districts, but they will have one particular district of your app, of your city, to visit, and they will look for particular things that you want to find, right? So to have a valuable outcome of the session, it has to have a goal, a resources and tools which you will use on that session, right? That's a one thing. Second thing would be a time box. So every session has to be a time box. And this has 2 ways how it helps. Firstly, if you have too much time, then a lot of your time might be wasted, right? If you have like 2 weeks for testing for one person for exploring, to some point it will be creativity, but at some point it will stop being creativity, it will be pure nonsense. You will go into testing scenarios that doesn't make sense. You will put some gem on the wall and that just doesn't make sense, right? Although there was a guy that have placed a banana on the wall, it was in United States, and he was an artist. He was like artwork. He just placed a banana on the wall. But to me, it was not very valuable, so I wouldn't call it creativity. And if testers in your team have too much time on exploring, they will test scenarios which just doesn't make sense, right? So if you limit the time boxing for 2 hours, 4 hours, 1 day, whatever, then they will pick up the scenarios that has the biggest return on investment, right? So they will look for scenarios which are the most valuable and execute these scenarios, not the other ones, right? Second thing is that if you have a tester that is maybe not very creative at the beginning, and set him, you have to test this feature for 2 hours, then he will firstly, in the first 1 hour, execute all the test cases which he normally executes during the daily basis, and he still has 1 hour. And our minds hate void. So if you will create void for him, this 1 hour void in his head, he will fill it out with creativity. So different new scenarios which he didn't execute previously, he will execute right now, right? So if by setting this time box, firstly you are limiting the time testers use for testing, but at the same time you're giving them enough time to being creative and come up with scenarios that they didn't come up during the daily work, right? So firstly, having the goal and the simplified charter. Secondly, giving a time box. And the last but not least, the most important part in my opinion is the testing charter. So again, Google it if you haven't heard about testing charter. Testing charter is a way of documenting your work. And I believe it's really important in exploratory testing, even though it doesn't seem like that, because exploring looks like, okay, go wherever. No, in my opinion, you have to document your session, because that also helps. And that's just to give you an example from the first session, which I had with one of my testers, where we were testing hearing instruments connected to a special device which were streaming audio to that hearing instruments. And we were testing scenario where I took the hearing instrument and went out of range of that device. And after it lost its connection, after some time, the program in my hearing instrument changed. And when I got back, I was so excited, and the program changed, and I found a defect because it didn't state on the program that it was previously. And the tester said to me, okay, Adam, but after what time it changed? Because if it changed after 60 seconds, then it's normal, because that's the way the hearing instruments work, right? And I don't know. I didn't document it. I didn't measure it. I don't know. It took some time, but what time was it? I don't know, right? So documenting your work is really important, because you might find some defects, or you might find some behavior that is normal, right? Many times, not many, but sometimes in my career, I found some behavior, I reported it as a defect, or I went to developer and said, oh, I found this great defect. And he asked me, okay, but did this and that happen? I said, I don't remember. I need to check it again. And I wasted time, right? If I would document it from the beginning, then I wouldn't waste time on repeating the same experiment second time, right? Because I would have everything documented. So that's one of the reasons why testing charter is really helpful in your work, because you're documenting your work, documenting every step that you perform, and also leaving some trail for other testers that will go over you after you. Because what we have done, for example, in our exploratory sessions, is that after some time we decided, okay, so the next session will not take new technique, but we'll exchange charters. So after first session, there were several teams working together on different charters, and we had this, for example, 3 teams and 3 testing charters. And on the next session, we shifted, right? So team number 1 to charter number 2, team number 2 charter number 3, and team number 3 charter number 1. So they took the work that previous team has documented and invented new scenarios, building on that knowledge to test different paths, right? And if they wouldn't document it, they wouldn't have that possibility. But we did it, and it helped us, right? So having a testing charter is really, really important in your exploratory session, to document your work, to give a guidance to people after you, and so on and so on. And last part, which I actually forgot to mention previously, is that we always perform exploratory sessions in teams. At least 2 people on one testing charter, on one goal, on one session. At least 2 people always working together. Right now, we sometimes work 3 people or 4 people in one team, right? So there is per programming, but we have per testing, right? Because people together are working together, and they're much more creative. But more of that would be on my workshop, which I encourage you, if this session is not enough, to join me on that workshop. I see more stuff showing on the chat, but I'm sorry, guys, I have to finish. It's past 7, and I promised my wife and kids to visit the city because we are right now exploring Kazimierz Dolny, really nice city in Poland. Please visit. So that's it from me, guys. If you want to contact me, write on the email or Twitter or LinkedIn, send me connection request. I will be glad to share more with you. And as I said previously, if you want, just join the workshop which I'm giving with Tesena. Enter this link, and you will have like the whole day with me, learning different techniques and learning how to apply this. That's it from me. Jana, would you like to take over?
Yes, thank you, Adam, for being here, and thank you for organizing the workshop next month. If anybody is interested, we will send you some further information, and we will also send you a link to the video from this webinar.
Great.
So enjoy your evening, Adam, with your family, and enjoy your vacation. And thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, guys, for joining. Bye.
Bye.